Are changes afoot in Leafland based on what we heard at Friday's press conference, or is it going to be same old, same old? We'll dissect what the three gentlemen had to say on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs Center podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morasssutti. What's going on, buddy? How was your weekend?
It was pretty good, obviously Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to anyone who is a mother and is listening to the show. Thank you very much.
In particular, Mama Morasssutti, Mama DiStefano.
Absolutely.
We appreciate and love you both very, very much.
Yes. And it's not just a celebration for the mothers, but a little birdie tells me it's a birthday coming up.
Buds, yeah, the big 3-0 today. It's not one that I wanted to come as quick as it did, Buds. 30. I feel like an old man.
You're first and I'm second, man. And I'm turning.
Yeah, you're next week. You're next week.
You're giving me the preview of what that whole situation is.
Yeah, well, I woke up with some back soreness, so that's I've got some partying to do next week. I guarantee you that'll be a 4-day recovery. Now that I'm in my 30s, the dirty 30. And yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know about you, but it feels like my mid 20s. Just like I blinked and it was gone. It was insane. I don't know if anyone else who's a 90s baby, if they blinked and it was kind of over. Like COVID really, I don't know, just like you lost 2-3 years basically throughout COVID, and it just feels like those were my like mid to late 20s, and it just evaporated like that. And here I am waking up a 30-year-old geezer, basically. That's what I feel like. No, appreciate it. Thank you. Yes. Hopefully I'll be celebrating my birthday next weekend, and it should be a lot of fun. Let's get into our Leafs chat, though. I don't think anyone cares about celebrating me and my birthday, but let's get into some Leafs chat, because when we last left the listeners of the podcast, it was Friday morning, and it was prior to listening to Brendan Shanahan, Brad Treliving, Keith Pelley speak Friday morning / late morning, early afternoon. And now we've heard from them, and I've got some thoughts. You've got some thoughts. So why don't we kind of break things down after and go through kind of our biggest takeaways from the press conference that featured those three. Like let's kind of let's work from the top and make our way down, I guess. So we could start with Keith Pelley, because this was kind of the first time that really heard from Pelley in a professional setting since he's taken the job. How did you think he did, and what did you think was notable about what Pelley had to say?
I thought there were good moments, and I thought there were moments where like I really had to like we're really gonna go there. I thought he the bold statements he made. Obviously, everyone's going with the good isn't good enough. Like everybody's ready to print that all over Scotiabank Arena and the Ford Performance Center.
I had two comments in particular that I think people are running with that you like, and those are nice, comments to live by. Whether or not it's actually true is another story, but good isn't good enough, obviously, is one, and the other one is we're not here to sell jerseys, right? We're here to win. Like that. Yeah. That was the other quote that I think people were kind of running wild with, and hopefully that's true. Hopefully that is the case, that they look at this team, they do a proper dissection, what's wrong, and they move forward accordingly, and not just, same old like we've seen over the past 6, 7, 8 years with the same core. We can dive deeper into that, because I think Brendan Shanahan had some more kind of telling things as to his thought process on how the team is built and whether or not he still believes that they can get it done. But in terms of Keith Pelley, like, was there anything else that kind of stuck out to you from what he had to say.
Well, when they were asking him about Brendan Shanahan and kind of, yeah, he talked about he liked the unity that there's the front office showing and things like that. But then he brings up the 3 Stanley Cup rings. And I'm like,
oh, Shanny's
Keith,
3 Stanley Cup rings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not in Toronto.
Keith, yes. He had them as a player. We have seen a lot of players with Stanley Cup rings go into and transition into the front office, right? That doesn't guarantee that those people know what it takes to build a cup winning team. Like not every president is like Joe Sakic, right? Joe Sakic also didn't get it right away. I get that. It took him time, but eventually he got his team there.
Yeah. I mean, Yzerman technically took the Bolts a long while, and then he left, and they went on to win with Julien Brisebois. But Yzerman's fingerprints of that core is all over the place there.
He was the architect.
He eventually got there too. But those guys, they got there in less than 10 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They weren't around for 10 years like Shanny has been. He's been here now for a decade and hasn't won. What I felt was kind of bizarre is he basically said that he had only evaluated from when he got the job in April 2nd to what he saw when the Leafs got bounced last week. And that's where he evaluated and didn't necessarily look at the entire scope of the 10 years because he wasn't there to judge, right? He can only judge what he's there for and what he can see. And I don't think a lot of people loved that outlook because it wasn't like, you can't just look at the last 6 weeks and be like, oh, okay, yeah, this team showed some, we like the direction that they were kind of going in, saw some good, saw some bad. Think that Shanny could possibly get it done. The unity between the two, I don't even know what that meant. That's a buzzword in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, it wasn't a massive endorsement from Keith Pelley. No. When point blank asked, why is Shanahan still here? When a lot of people thought that it could have been time for him to get let go and go in a different direction. And for me, I don't think he had enough time to really properly evaluate Brendan Shanahan. And that really goes back to the fact that I believe that this organization, by waiting this long to get Keith Pelley into the mix here, to me means that honestly, they waited way too long, and now they have to wait another year, possibly waste another year to properly evaluate Brendan Shanahan and then go from there. That was that's where I think they're at. They didn't have enough time to evaluate, and he didn't want to make a big enough splashy hiring / new firing of Brendan Shanahan so early into the job.
Yeah, it's tough. He's been on the job, what, 6 weeks? About 6 weeks. To expect that sort of change, the only way I could have seen that happening is if the board brought him aboard and said, look, we want to make a big change up top for the Leafs. We want you to handle that, and we want you to handle the next part. I don't think a lot of candidates for CAO would have wanted that to be kind of the first thing on their plate coming into a position like this. And let's not forget, this is the first time we have heard the CEO of MLSE in this sort of setting since what, Tim Lewicki? Let's be honest here. The last two, well, I know one was an interim CEO, more of an interim CEO, but we've never heard from the CEO. Now, we don't necessarily, we're not asking to hear from them, but it just felt like this entire time, the Shanahan has been going to the board, and the board is who's kind of judging what he's been doing. I feel like that's wrong because he's giving his mea culpa.
Honestly, to me, Shanahan's had so much free reign over the past few years. The board has to approve decisions, but the board, I don't think, ever really looked at Shanahan and held him to any sort of accountability for what went wrong. And I think that's why he's lasted so long. I mean, you win one playoff round in 10 years. I mean, we spoke about it a little bit last week with David Alter, But sure, the first 5, 6 years that he was here, I think you saw a lot of positive regression and a trajectory that looked like this thing was going in the right direction and things were great. Of course, the board and MLSE had to have been happy with what Shanahan had been able to accomplish. But the last like 2, 3 years, things have been so stagnant and it's plateaued. Ultimately, it's plateaued. And I think that going kick, going at it another year with Brendan Shanahan and getting another year of evaluation out of him, I think is something where I look at it and I'm like, a year from now, we'll probably be saying that last season was a waste. And they should have canned Shanny then and started the process at that point to look for somebody new. Or maybe, they decide we don't really need a president's role now that we have someone in place up at the top of MLSE. Then the GM can just report to him. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
Shanahan, it made sense to have somebody in place because you didn't want to have them going to the board. So you had, a middleman.
Yeah.
Well, Keith Pelley is supposed to be that middleman now. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
exactly.
So it does beg the question, like, Shanahan, how much is he going to have to prove himself over this upcoming season? Like, yeah, he's around now because what Keith Pelley saw from April 2nd to like May 2nd, he thought was good enough to stick around. We'll see what he does in this next year, right? There's a big off season, a big time off season, some massive changes could potentially be coming, and he's going to have to approve those changes. Why don't we take a break? Let's come back and let's get into what Brendan Shanahan had to say, because that is where things got a little spicy for Friday when listening to these three guys speak. So we'll get to that. We'll get to what Brad Treliving had to say as well. Some injury updates from guys who were hurt throughout the playoffs. We have some of those for you. And so we'll get to that all on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano and David Morasssutti. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Policygenius. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with financial safety net starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help you talk through it. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs, or even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team, and they have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. They've got thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Check life insurance offer to-do list with no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morasssutti with you. We're breaking down what Brendan Shanahan, Brad Treliving, and Keith Pelley had to say at their year-end press conference back on Friday. Brendan Shanahan, I think, was probably one of the more polarizing people that we wanted to hear from at this press conference because, I mean, quite frankly, a lot of us weren't really sure if Brendan Shanahan even deserved to be up there. Lots of people thought that Shanahan probably should have been given his walk-in papers at the end of the season. He got a half vote of confidence from Keith Pelley, where he just flat out said Brendan Shanahan is the president of this cup. He's won, but then also kind of said, I could only evaluate what I saw in like the month that he was there. But regardless, he's sticking with Shanny for at least one more season. I guess he didn't really put a timeline on it, but I'm sure if things don't go well, Shanny is kind of the next domino to fall. I think we can all agree there. I mean, what takeaways did you get from what Brendan Shanahan had to say on Friday?
I thought he was the one that he was sitting on pins and needles the entire press conference, right? It's easy to own up to mistakes after it's happened, right? but this press conference, the way he presented everything, should have been done a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, he's not only is he in most cases a year too late, he is like 3-4 years too late, in my opinion, right? With
Too late on
everything.
what? Let's elaborate. Too late on what?
Well, to be open to making changes that need to be made, right? He
Right.
kept, like, he literally said in this press conference, everything is on the table.
Right.
Where was that years ago when literally everybody
Hold
was
on.
saying,
We're diving too quickly into it. So
okay,
the biggest takeaway, I think
yeah,
we can all agree, the biggest takeaway from what Brendan Shanahan had to say is he seemed to waver on the core and keeping the core
yes,
together, whether or not the core could get it done for the first time ever. Like even last year, he came out and he basically said, like, we're not going to make a change just to make a change. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then before it was, we can and we will, and echoing all of that. Meanwhile, this year, it was not that. He came out and said, quote, I still believe there are times when patience is the suitable call. However, when you see patterns persist and the results don't change, you have to adjust the way you think about things. We will look at everything this summer. We will consider everything this summer, all the intention of one thing that we're here for, and that's to make the Maple Leafs better and to win. That's the first time that we've ever heard him say that he was going to
yeah.
look at everything this summer, and the first time that he's ever showed any type of wavering towards that core.
And everyone is saying what took so long. Like, all of a sudden, like, you're saying everything's on the table, but is it? Can everything really be on the table? Because last year your general manager hinted that changes should be considered, and part of the reason why those changes were made, that declaration was made a year ago, was because you had more flexibility to make moves that could actually reshape the club.
Well,
Now,
yes. Yeah. That's the most frustrating part
yes,
is like a year ago, Kyle Dubas came out and said basically this exact statement, right? He came out for the first time last year and showed wavering towards if whether or not the core four could get it done. If he still had belief on that. And he said we'll have to look at everything this summer and basically hinted at potentially making a change. Unfortunately, he was fired a few days after making that statement. And Brendan Shanahan came in and basically there was remember the report from was it CJ? Was it Chris Johnson who said that he had heard that Shanny contacted the core four and basically said, you guys are all sticking around. Do you recall hearing that report? Like, I'm pretty sure that happened. I don't think I'm mistaken that. I might be wrong on who reported, but I thought it was Chris Johnston. Regardless, Shanny definitely wanted
yeah.
to keep that core and had a belief that that core could get it done. And the
I think
problem
it
is,
happened not long after, like almost right after Dubas.
yeah, right after
They made that
Dubas.
decision. Like,
Yeah, and
I think it was that same day he called the core four. I think CJ was the one that reported this, and he called the core four and he told them, "Look, I know Kyle's gone, but don't you guys fret."
right. You guys are sticking around. We still have belief in you guys. And a year later, another first round exit, he's finally come around to that realization. The problem is, and this is what you were about to get to, is it's a year too late. Because a year ago, both Willie and Mitch Marner had limited no trade clauses. Now they have full no moves. And now you ended up re-signing William Nylander anyways, so it's not like you're going to be moving him. But boy, is it ever a lot freaking harder to trade Mitch Marner this summer than it would have been to trade him last summer, where he only had a say in, I think it was a 10-team no trade
I
last
don't
year.
even think he had a no. I think the
I think there was
clause.
a limited no trade. I think possibly, but regardless, maybe it wasn't modified. I don't know, but
'Cause
regardless, now he has a full say. Now it's a full no
yeah,
move as opposed to last year. If he would have made the trade at the draft prior to July 1st, the Leafs had way more control. Now they have little control, obviously, with Mitch Marner having the no move clause and the ability to block any trade he wants. should he decide to do so.
What
So
what kills me through all this too is if let's say Shanahan actually decides now's the time to look at the trade Marner, everybody in the league knows that's what you want to do. Everyone knows that what Marner's situation is, how little leverage the Leafs have. If you decide to do this a year ago, you still have a little bit of wiggle room to try to get something that helps your team, and the league doesn't go like, yeah, but why? Like, why should we help you? This year, it's a different story.
and Marner had a full year left on his contract,
Yeah,
like 2 years technically. You would add 2 years of Marner instead of trading for a guy who's pending UFA, and now it's like, well, if we're not gonna get an extension done with him, like a sign and trade, then we're not gonna be willing to give up X, Y, and Z. Now they're gonna be trying to hold out for as little of a return as possible because they don't want to give up the farm for a guy who might only play one season. Whereas if you had at least 2 years and possibly more, it's a bit of a different situation.
even better. You go to a team that has the cap space, but maybe doesn't want to pay a bloated salary for Mitch Marner. You know what his salary is going to be this year, and what same as last year, just over $8 million. Because like a lot of the other players,
well, what was his signing bonus last year?
$7.25 million.
So they still had to pay that.
Yeah, but I think teams would be okay paying Marner $7 million versus when the Leafs first signed into that contract, it was a $15.3 million signing bonus.
Yeah, true.
So I think teams would like, if you look at a team that, again, as I said, they have the cap space, but maybe they didn't want to pay Mitch $11 million. Mitch Marner $3 million less than what his actual cap hit is might actually make some financial sense for a team.
Yeah. I mean, which realistically, financially, it still makes sense for teams to do it this year. It's just
do it after his signing bonus kicks
after
in.
the sign, right? But to me, it's ultimately going to come down to Marner. Like, I don't think teams are going to be scared to trade for Mitch Marner. I think lots of teams will line up to bring him onto their team. He's still like a top 25 player in the league, hands down. Like, whatever you think about Marner, the fact that he's a no-show come playoff time, whatever, that may be true, but at least the first 82 games of the season, he's a top 25 player that, is going to get you upwards of nearly 100 points for you. He'll help you win games in the regular season and get you into the playoffs and do it while also being like Selke worthy as well. He will give you that. And then hopefully you got some other horses that can play in the playoffs if you want to have success there.
Yeah.
But like there are some teams also, like not to bring this back to, to bring it back to what Keith Pelley said, but he said, we're not here to sell jerseys. A lot of people talk about how much jerseys and tickets the core four sells with their success in the regular season. So Mitch, if a team wants to trade for him, even if they're not getting the playoff success, if he's selling tickets and he turns into must-watch TV in the regular season, and he also sells jerseys for opposing teams, that's valuable to them. Very valuable to them to get those type of merch dollars and gate dollars with having a Mitch Marner on your team. But again, I don't think teams are definitely going to be interested in him if he's available, but it's whether or not Mitch wants to go is going to be the big question. And we'll have plenty of time to debate and discuss that over the course of the next few weeks. Because again, Locked On Leafs, still a daily Maple Leafs centric podcast here on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. Let's take one more break. Let's come back. Let's get to Brad Treliving and what he had to say about the direction of the group. And he had a little bit more information as to what led to the firing of Sheldon Keefe. And he also kind of let us know what he's going to be looking for and potentially a timeline for the next head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we also have a few injury updates to get to as well. That's all coming up next. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morasssutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the parts you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Locked on Leafs continues here on a Monday. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morasssutti with you. And we already went through what we thought about what Brendan Shanahan had to say, what Keith Pelley had to say, and now we move on to general manager Brad Treliving, and we dissect what he had to say at Friday's press conference, year-end press conference with management. What was your main kind of takeaway from what Brad Treliving had to say, Dave?
Out of all the three, he's the one that I actually thought did the best in terms of conveying not only the disappointment in this season, but showing, I just felt like hearing what he had to say and how he was saying it, he was like, okay, like we did it. We ran everything kind of back. We made changes that we thought would have helped. It didn't work. We need to change. Like I thought he was the most genuine one with out of all the three that we heard in that press conference.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And I think it also comes to the fact that he probably feels like he has more security than Brendan Shanahan. I mean, I didn't expect Keith Pelley to really say a whole lot anyway. Like he's been on the job for 5 weeks for Pete's sake. So I don't know if he's got a huge grasp on what's going on. But he definitely sounded like he had more conviction in what he had to say than Brendan Shanahan. I think it comes down to the fact that he knows he's got a little bit more security, and also the fact that he didn't build the team, right? Like the failures of the past is not really tied to Brad Treliving. Now he kind of fell on the sword, and he said that it's, the team did not live up to their expectations that they had earlier in the year, and he did try and take it on the chin and say that it was his fault. But he had a hell of a lot more home runs than he did strikeouts. With the moves that he made over the course of the last year, I guess, since he took over as general manager of the hockey team. But yeah, I felt that he also reiterated the fact that change is necessary. Like obviously he moved out the coach and he went out and he said, I felt strongly that a new voice was needed in reference to his firing of Sheldon Keefe. But then in reference to the core, he basically said, we've got really good players, but it hasn't worked. And it's true. And that's different from what he said last year, right? Last year, it sounded like he said, when you've got the players that you have and the players who are so good, you don't want to just get rid of them. Like it's hard to find a collection of 4 or 5 guys that are this good on one team. And yeah, sure, I suppose in a vacuum individually, but as a unit, they have not really accomplished a whole lot of anything. And after one season, Brad Treliving noticed that may not be possible. That's why he said, we've got really good players, but it hasn't worked. And it's probably not going to work, or else it would have at some point over the last 8 years. So I think Brad Treliving also kind of acknowledged that some major change has to be made, not just at the coaching position, which is already happening with Sheldon Keefe being let go and a new head coach going to be coming in. We'll talk about that shortly, but also there's going to be some change on the ice as well. Now I got you. You got me?
Am I?
Yeah, you're good. No, you're good. Dave texted me. He's like, am I frozen? I'm like, no, I see you, buddy.
You're frozen to me, but I'll keep going.
Oh, I'm frozen. Okay.
Yeah, but it might just be me. It's okay. Yeah, no, I think you're right. When I see it, like Brad Treliving is new to all this. He hasn't been a part of this organization, right? Like Brendan Shanahan has, and like Kyle Dubas has, like Sheldon Keefe has. He is a fresh perspective on everything, which is why I didn't hate the idea of bringing a new general manager because you know what? He can come in and say, this is no, we'll try to fix it. But you know what? If there's a leak, sometimes changing it is better than patching it.
Sure, but he also wasted a full season by keeping they ran it back last year, right? Just with a different general manager, but they ran back the main characters, right? That was the only thing, and we can get into a conversation about whether or not that was the right decision. I mean, I personally think that it wasn't. I think you either should have cleaned house last year, including Shanahan, do it the whole nine, or you continue to run it back with all of the same cast of characters. Um, but anyways, that's a whole another conversation we can get into later. But getting back to Treliving, was there anything else here that you thought was interesting that he had to say?
I mean, well, you talk about the quote where he's saying everyone in the organization, everyone on the team should feel important, not just 4 players, right?
Yeah, he said the same stuff last year.
He did, but I think it just re-emphasizes, I think, that everyone's talking about how they're top heavy, right? They put
Hmm.
half their cap to 4 forwards. I
Hmm.
think it's just another way of him saying, yeah, we haven't put the importance on the rest of the roster the way it should be, right? I think, again, the formula just doesn't work. I think he recognizes it. It's going to be very hard to change this formula. Like, this might be the toughest task. Like, hiring a coach, you find the coach, you hire them. You can't really change out areas of the team that you feel might just be too locked down and you can't make that change.
Well, yeah, finding the guys on the ice to actually perform is obviously the hardest job. You know, that's a extremely difficult job to do for sure. But that's what he's got to that's the job that he's got in front of him right now. I thought it was interesting that he brought up goaltending. And basically said that the two things that continue to haunt this team is a lack of scoring, which is true, lack of scoring in the playoffs. Special teams, again, it's a very similar thing. And those are part of the reason why he moved on from Sheldon. We'll get to that in a sec. But he also mentioned the goaltending, where the goaltending is going to be something that, he said we have to put ourselves in a position where we don't have the second best goaltender in each of these series. And he kind of, you go through the last few years and goaltending hasn't necessarily been the problem, and I would agree with that. It's not like, Samsonov was an issue. The bigger problem was they only scored 2 goals a game. I mean, what are you going to do, right? That only means, Sammy, you can only allow 1 goal per game if we want to win. That's kind of hard to do. That being said, the 2 games that they were the number 1 goaltender in the series with them when Joseph Wall outdueled Jeremy Swayman, they did win those games. That being said, he basically came out and I don't know if you read it this way, but basically said like, yeah, we're not going to be re-signing Samsonov. He was like, yeah, Samsonov's contract is up. We like Wall. We need to figure him out health wise, but essentially was like, yeah, we like Joseph Wall and got to find someone to play with him. It doesn't sound like they're going to bring it back to Samsonov.
Samsonov is a free agent. Well, yeah, thanks for the obvious, Brad. Are you looking to bring him back? Didn't look like he was. Like,
did not sound like it.
No, and honestly, I don't blame the team because like that was a lot of work. Now, look, obviously you made the investment. You got to do your best to make the investment work. I get that, but I think I think he realized that when you look at the way this team played in front of Samsonov, again, I felt like when Samsonov was in net, this team felt and played a little bit differently. I wouldn't say they were on eggshells, but there was some nervousness. And then, when Wool came into the series, all you hear was, "Oh, we feel so confident with Wool and net."
Yeah,
that wasn't a ringing endorsement from the other guys on Samsonov. Like a lot of guys. I remember when Marner came out and supported Samsonov when he was having his struggles. Like that's a good thing to have the support of your teammates. But then when you hear other guys say give that ring endorsement to Wall, I would venture to say that will play a big factor in how this team sorts out their goaltending situation, because Joseph Woll's on a very good contract, especially if he can replicate what he did for most of last season into this season.
Thank you, Kyle, for that, by the way.
Yeah, that was probably the best gift. One of that and the Jake McCabe trade are probably the two best gifts Kyle Dubas gave this club. Now it's a matter of like
Matthew Nyes. Man, drafting Matthew Nyes was nice.
Yeah, that was pretty good too. Not gonna lie, that was a solid move.
But anyway,
but now it's like, okay, you have to go out and get that other goalie. That's not easy, right? Like, we've seen teams have tried going and get goaltenders, and especially goaltenders that are like that 1B guy, right? Like, you can't just go and get a veteran backup who could play 20 games. You might need a guy that's going to have to play more than that. And like most goaltenders nowadays are capable of playing that 30 to 40 game, stretch. But you saw what happened to Martin Jones last year when he was called upon for extended duty. Now I get it. He was playing a lot, especially.
Yeah, that was like every game. Because I was going to say, like, do you think Martin Jones could, like, do you think that's where they go with, like, a Jones Wall? Or do you think they go kind of bigger and better than that, possibly? I mean, look, the problem is how much, like, whoever your 1B is might turn into your number one at some point if they don't figure out what the heck's wrong with Joseph Woll. Because this guy's entire career, since he's really entered the Maple Leafs organization, has been injury after injury after injury. Like, when he was with the Marlies, he was injured quite a bit, and now he's been here, and he got hurt twice this year. 3 times, actually.
What would help is if there was a third goaltender in the Marlies that can be that, like, okay, maybe if Martin Jones isn't getting it done, we have another goalie with the Marlies.
The Swedish monster.
Yeah, he kind of flamed out near the end of the season. Keith Petruzzelli didn't do so bad, right? Maybe you go that route. You get a veteran backup. Maybe you go with a guy like a Laurent Boissois, right?
Yeah, we could talk about this all off season. We could do a power ranking, about the goalies who could come in, who they should target.
I will say, though, just going back to Treliving, I did appreciate that comment where he says we have to, at some point, not always have the second best goalie in the series. I think that's totally valid, because that's happened a lot to Toronto.
Yeah, the only problem I have with that is it's not often like their goalie's fault. Like, it wasn't like Freddie's fault. It wasn't Sammy's fault. It wasn't who else was here? Campbell's fault. It wasn't Woll's fault that, on the other side you got blanking? Florida goaltender. Just beat the Bruins. Are now up 3-1. Why am I blanking on his name? I need some help here, Dave. Bobrovsky.
Yes,
Jeez,
I don't know why I was blanking too.
Oh my god! Like, it's not their fault that, like, Bobrovsky turned into Vasilevsky 2.0 for that series, and Jeremy Swayman was unbelievable in that series. And then all of a sudden against Florida is allowing like seeing eye shots from the point. It's like, what? Where was that against Toronto? It's not like they're doing much different. I don't know. Those are conversations, I suppose, that aren't really helpful at this point, where the Leafs have had a lot of bad luck, I guess, when it comes to goaltending in the playoffs. Not necessarily their goaltenders, but where the opposition's goaltenders just happen to turn a switch for like that series in particular. And I don't know, man. It is what it is. So maybe the next goalie that they find can break through and be that better goalie of the two, but some of that I don't think is like Toronto's fault. It just kind of is just some unlucky hockey stuff. Right. I don't know. I don't even know how else to talk about it. In terms of what he had to say about Sheldon Keefe, do we want to get into this tomorrow and then maybe get into more flushed out conversation about the coaching situation?
Yeah.
So why don't we do that? He did speak to the decision that went into firing Sheldon Keefe and what he's looking for in the next head coach, and the timeline of what he'll be anticipating, and then we could talk about some of the guys as some of the top candidates who will be out there. Maybe even by tomorrow, we might even have some names that they plan on interviewing at some point here early on. I will say, just to really quickly to finish things up here, the injury report that came out afterward. Austin Matthews, we already knew was ill at the end of game 2. And then in game 3, ended up kind of getting, or no, game 4, he ended up taking a hit that presented some possibility of what Brad Treliving called a head injury, and then wasn't really cleared to play until game 7. So still very vague, but head injury, you think concussion. I heard something else. I'm not going to go with it, but I did hear something else that goes with concussion. I don't know, but that was the not so. Uh, I don't know. That was just they didn't really say much. Didn't say a whole lot on Matthews. By McMahon though, it was an MCL sprain that kept him out. They were hoping to get him back in the second round of the playoffs, but obviously did not get there. So that was the issue with Bobby McMahon. Nylander already came out and talked about the migraines that he had, possibly could have suffered a concussion at some point as well. Joseph Wall, a back sprain at the end of game 6. So that was kind of confirmed that goal with 0.1 seconds left to where he went to go and make a move to make the save, tweaked his back, and it cost him game 7. Again, just unluckiness, just straight up unluckiness for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the goaltending position. But that's what happened with Joseph Wall at the end of game 6, and that's why Sammy played game 7. And Connor Dewar underwent shoulder surgery. He should be available for the start of training camp, and he's a pending RFA, but Treliving, kind of suggested that he expects Dewar to be back as property, as a restricted free agent of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So those were the injuries and the updates that we were provided by the general manager of the team. So we'll get into the whole coaching situation, what he had to say about Sheldon Keefe, and we'll give a list of coaches that we think should be on the short list for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll do that tomorrow, and we'll also gush a little bit about Easton Cowan, who had himself a weekend in the OHL Championship Series. Oh boy, Easton Cowan. We're gonna be locked on Easton Cowan pretty soon. In the next couple of weeks, I think, if he keeps going at the rate that he's going. 15 points his last 5 playoff games.
Crazy.
They need that in Toronto. They need that in Toronto. Yes, they do. So we'll get into all of that on tomorrow's show. So be sure to stay subscribed. Make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast for daily podcasts all the way through the playoffs, all the way through the off season. It's 365, man, of Toronto Maple Leafs hockey. So we're bringing you all the news and information we possibly can. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms, including up on YouTube, to receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at _Morasssutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.
Everything on my computer froze. I'm like, what the fuck? I thought I was gonna.
Hang on. You're going through here.
I'll cut this out. You can just end the recording. That's